Yeah, we'll just say a few words about Saint Columba. As Father said, we have his very large icon in the church, and probably he's the most well-known Scottish saint today, let's say. And most of what we know about his life comes from one book called the Vita Columba, it's called, which was written by another saint, Saint Adovnan, who was starets of Iona, the monastery which Columba founded. But at a slightly later date, he was the ninth starets. So he wrote about Columba about 80 or 100 years afterwards. Columba's name, which he was known at the time of his life, was Colum Kili, which means dove of the church. This was like a familiar name that was given to him. We call him Columba from the Latin, basically. He was from Ireland. He was born in Donegal, County Donegal in modern-day Ireland in the year 521. So he was born in the early 6th century. And quite importantly, he was minor royalty, let's say. He was the great-grandson of an Irish king. Not the Irish king, there are many kings, but he was quite important. So he had some standing just by way of his birth, let's say. He was somebody important. So in his early life in Ireland, we know that he studied. He became a monk. He was ordained a deacon, then a priest. And at a certain point, an interesting fact from his early life is that he became involved in an argument. This is what is believed, or a dispute about a psalter, a psalteria, which he had copied, because of course in those days the only copies of psalteria or Evangelii were hand copied, one from another. And he had copied one, and there was a dispute about who should be the owner of this copy. And in fact, this led to a battle, a small war between different family factions, and many people died in this battle just about this book. It's hard to believe, but this is what happened. And Columba was kind of blamed for this, and the church leaders in that part of Ireland, they had a council to decide what to do with him, and they decided they would excommunicate him, which was as serious as it gets in the Christian church. But there was one man who stood up for him. His name was Saint Brendan, not the Saint Brendan who we talked about a few weeks ago, Saint Brendan the Navigator. This was a different Saint Brendan the Elder, he's sometimes called. So he spoke up for Columba, and in the end it was decided that he would be exiled. He would have to leave Ireland. This was to be his penance, let's say, his canon. But he would be allowed to stay in the church. So he traveled to Scotland. The story is that he took 12 companions with him, 12 other monks. And after a period of time, searching around Scotland, let's say around the west coast, he was given, in fact, the island of Iona. He didn't arrive there and decide to make a monastery. He was given the island by a king of a kingdom called Dalriada, which doesn't, of course, exist anymore, but it was an area of Scotland and Ireland mixed together, was this place Dalriada. And possibly because of his connections, or because of his, he was definitely a great communicator. One way or another, he was able to get permission to use this island of Iona, and he founded the monastery there. He was first there. He founded a monastery, and this monastery became very, very important. It was built up quickly, and he was very focused on learning, on education, St. Columba. And they had what they call a scriptorium, which is the place where you copy manuscripts. Using one psalteria or Evangelii, you would copy another one. And they had schools there, including a missionary school, where to teach other monks how to be missionaries, this kind of thing. Became very important. There's of course lots of events attached to his life, which we could talk about. Probably the most interesting ones for me, I think, he had a visit to somebody called King Brede, who was the Pictish king. The Picts were the peoples of roughly speaking, the northern and eastern part of Scotland. They were like a separate race of people, and they were pagan, they weren't Christian, but Columba visited him. And there are he visited him in Inverness. That's where the king had his throne. And there's two slightly varying accounts of this. One says that Columba converted him successfully to Christianity. There's another account which says he didn't convert him, but he won his respect, the respect of this king. And this was a very, very important moment in Columba's life and in Christian history of Scotland, because by winning the respect of these important people, like the King of the Picts and others like him, he was able to gain influence to build other churches, to go and be a missionary in areas in some safety, let's say, with the protection of some of these kings. So it's very important for Scotland, and it allowed Christianization of the people to happen quicker. And I think this was one of the great skills of Columba, was he had the ability to communicate effectively with people from all parts of life, but in particular those important people, let's say kings and chieftains, warlords, landowners. And he used this gift which he had for the betterment of the church, let's say, and he was incredibly successful. There's also another more colourful small story from his life where he's the first recorded incident which includes Nessie, the Loch Ness monster. He was on the River Ness, which is the river which flows into Loch Ness, and it's recorded in this book, Vita Columbae, that there was a monster, something in the water, which had killed a local Pict. And anyway, Columba was involved in calming this monster and so on. And this became perhaps the first legend or the first story of the Loch Ness monster. So it's quite unusual. He died, Columba, in the year he died in 597, and he died on Iona and was buried there. And obviously he had a huge influence. Iona became the center of monasticism, and it was an important monastery. There were monasteries as far away as the north of England, which looked to Iona as their head, let's say. It was very, very influential. Just to return briefly to the book about which we know Columba from, which is called, as I said, is called the Vita Columbae, written by Saint Adovnan. The book, if anyone's tried to read it or has a copy, or it's not a typically written book. So this is not a chronological history of Columba's life. It's in 3 parts. It's quite interesting. So the first part is, I can't remember what it's called, but it's called Prophecies or something like that, and it describes the times when Columba used his gift of, sometimes we say clairvoyance, or the gift of prophecy, to be able to talk about the future before it happened, let's say. So this is the first part of this book about his life. The second part describes his miracles, which he performed in his life. And the third part I think it's called Apparitions, and it describes the visitations which he had from angels and from heavenly bodies, let's say, in his life. So it's a very unusually written book. It's not like a history book. But in fact, as a book, it's probably the most important book in early Scottish history, because it survives intact and it tells historians, not just religious people like us, but historians of Scotland. It tells them a lot about the people of Scotland at the time, and also about how monks lived and organized themselves at that time. So very, very important book which was written about him. And of course, he has this huge influence, Columba, to today. I mean, he's one of the few Scottish saints which I think all Scottish people would know if you spoke to them. There are very few people who don't know something about Saint Columba. So he's maybe our most important saint. And of course, maybe here in the Romanian Orthodox Church in particular, I think we have a special affection these days for Saint Columba, or a special extra remembrance of his life, because of the work of our dear brother in Christ, Father Seraphim, on Mull and on Iona, in founding a monastery. Because I think we all feel the sense that he's continuing the work of those important Celtic monks and saints of that time, of Columba's time. And that's it, really. There's a lot to talk about Columba's life, but I think just wanted to